Very early this morning, my friend and neighbor, Hildegard Mahoney, sent me a quote via email. Common sense is not a gift. It's a punishment. Because you have to deal with everyone who doesn't have it. I want to thank all my friends for coming and all of you courageous people who have either had COVID or believe that the sooner you get it over with, the better off you will be. That is at least what I believe. I developed that attitude at a very early age. I was born in the fall of 1944 in a bomb shelter of a Budapest hospital. The Russian army was pushing the Germans back towards Berlin. As luck would have it, Hitler decided to take a stand in Budapest. It failed, but we ended up with hundreds of bombed-out buildings. I grew up in what remained of one of those bombed-out buildings with my mother and my grandmother. At the time, nobody thought that the Russian army would stay there for the next 46 years. But they did. They were defending socialism. They installed a communist government. The Communist Party's job was to build socialism by putting the members of the party in key positions of power, directing the economy. When I was 7 years old, my grandmother passed away. One day my mother told me that when I wake up the next day, I'll be all alone at home, but I shouldn't worry. She would be home by the time I would have to leave for school. I insisted that she should take me along wherever she was going because I would be scared by myself alone. We had to get up 4:30 in the dark, freezing winter night to walk to the baker. But by the time we got there, quite a few people were already standing in line, and many more were still coming. We joined them in the bread line. While we stood there in the freezing cold, I asked Mother why we had to wait there in the cold 2 hours before the baker opened. She explained that the baker did not have enough bread for everyone, and that people toward the end of the line would usually have to leave empty-handed. In spite of the cold, standing in the bread line for the first time was interesting. Everybody got a 4.5-pound loaf of bread, still hot from the oven. But after the third time, I told my mother that she should go by herself. I was more scared of the cold than I was of the ghosts in the dark apartment. For my 10th birthday, Mother gave me an alarm clock and told me that I was now old enough to stand in the bread line. When we ran out of bread and she couldn't get any on her way home from work, I would have to go and spend my early morning hours in the bread line. When I was 12, we had the so-called 1956 Hungarian Revolution. We won. The Russian soldiers withdrew to their barracks. But after a few days of freedom, Mao told Khrushchev that if he lets Hungary go, all the socialist countries will fall like dominoes. More tanks and troops came in from Russia, and they propped up the government. But the Communist Party bosses came to understand that they were sitting on a power keg. If they do not allow just a minimal level of private enterprise, people will no longer accept the needless suffering. So they allowed individual, one-man, immediate family businesses. They were not allowed to hire any employees, but they still miraculously eliminated many of the shortages. As a result, everyday life became a little easier. When I was in college, it was compulsory to study Marxism and Leninism. The first tenet, paraphrased, the Communist Party and its cause is sacrosanct. It represents the interests of the people, and any act or word that could be construed to be against it must be crushed and punished immediately. Second, the capitalist economy is a chaotic series of booms and busts. Thousands of businesses make decisions without knowing what everybody else is doing. Without coordination, most products and services will be in imbalance, oversupply or undersupply. This is very expensive. Companies go bankrupt, people get laid off. The economic consequences are horrible. On the other hand, a socialist economy is planned with perfect information. The planners know what everybody is doing and can perfectly regulate supply to meet demand. Now, this sounded pretty good to me and logical. So why did it not work? Why did we have to stand in bread lines in the freezing cold for hours? But these were questions we were not allowed to ask. Remember the first tenet. Anyone who did was kicked out of school with slim chances for a job and maybe even went to jail. We did not dare to discuss any of these topics, even among ourselves. For anyone may be in some trouble and be forced to give us up to save their own skin. This was perhaps the most difficult aspect of life for all of us to bear. We lived behind the Iron Curtain like zombies, covering our eyes and ears, reciting meaningless slogans in unison that none of us believed. That's why I had to take a chance and leave as soon as I could. The Common Sense Society is an organization that advocates free speech and free debate over such issues which are incredibly important to discuss, especially these days. We must go to campuses and try to convince faculty and students that if we cannot freely debate the reason for breadlines, we will not be able to avoid standing in them. Thank you.